Hi guys, and welcome back to the ECAfrica podcast. My name is Taynita, and we're joined with a very special guest. But before I introduce her, I hope that you guys will like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also listen to our podcast on Spotify. We have loved the engagement that we've seen so far, so please let us know who you want to see next, any questions that you have for our entrepreneurs. We've really been enjoying creating this community. Today's guest is an author, a mom, a business owner, an entrepreneurial expert. Honestly, such a change maker in her field. Today we're joined with Xoliswa Moraka. I'm so excited to have you here because I've actually watched one of your talks before. And so when she walked into our offices, I was like, oh my gosh, where do I know you from? So thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's so exciting to have you. So something that we like to do on ECAfrica is, because we think nobody can advocate for you as best as you can advocate for yourself, is we like to ask our entrepreneurs to please introduce yourselves. Give us a quick little overview about who you are.
So I'm Xoliswa Moraka, and I am a mom first to two beautiful girls whom I happen to homeschool. I'm a business strategist, particularly working with entrepreneurs and small business owners and helping them build their businesses from ideation to expansion. So walking the journey with them. And I'm a new author of a book called Entrepreneurial Guide to the Promised Land, which is a book that has captured my own journey as an entrepreneur and a practitioner supporting entrepreneurs to build purposeful businesses that add value in their markets and in the economy.
Stunning. So you mentioned that your book encapsulates this whole journey. Yeah. And something that we like to find out about our entrepreneurs is, how did you actually get started in entrepreneurship? Because I say this a lot on our show, but a lot of people think it's a super linear process, or that it's birthed out of desperation, right? That because I can't find a job, because I don't enjoy my space, I need to go into this other thing. Yeah. But there's so much nuance there. There's so many people that start businesses while they're in corporate. There's so many people that never went into corporate and started businesses at 17 and 18. And so what is your journey in that?
Sure. So I think for me, the journey was back in 2008-9 when the first spark hit for me, right? And how that came about is I was employed in corporate. So I was working for corporate South Africa, and I was running a learnership program that I had got into through the company, right? So it was 2 years later, after being part of a program, I was given an opportunity to run this learnership program, and it was an exciting period for me. We were making real impact on the ground. So remember, we're recruiting young people from communities such as Alex, because I come from Alex. So giving them an opportunity to build skills so that they can become employable. So when I was given an opportunity to run that program, for me, that was a start to a purpose-driven life, a start for my career in development. So when the company decided that they were not going to continue with the learnership program, because at that point we were experiencing global recession, and they had to make obviously financial adjustments, and they decided, you know what, we're not continuing with onboarding new interns. My heart came out of me when that happened, right? So I still had a job. So I always stress this, I still had a job. I was not retrenched. I was not fired. There was still ways in which I can get involved. But for me, the work I was doing meant more than just a paycheck. And when they took that away, they took part of me. And then I started thinking, can I do this on my own? Can I build a business? Because I still believed there was a need to prepare young people from underserviced communities like Alex for the world of work. Because one, I think simple things like preparing somebody with a CV, the CVs I had to review and select from, locked people out of opportunities simply because of how they looked, So I was like, there's an opportunity to just go do the basic stuff, help people prepare for interviews and all of those things, So that was kind of that journey back in 2008. I will admit and say the word entrepreneurship did not even exist in my vocab.
Right.
I did not know it. And also I did not understand the process of enterprise building. But what I did understand at that point was that I have seen a lot of activities in my community, in Alex, of people selling and making money out of that. My mom being one of them. My mom put us through school selling cakes for a living, and she used her skill and desire and experience to build something, you know. But that's not what I wanted for me. So I I really did not want to just sell.
Right.
You know, and use my skills and passion. I wanted to enterprise and build a business that can stand. And I think with that understanding, I then decided, I was 23, 24 at that time, I decided I can take a leap of faith. I don't have a child, I don't have a house to pay and all of those things. So that was my rationale when I quit my first job, to say I can go into entrepreneurship. And it showed me flames. It showed me flames because I realized I didn't know anything, right? And the only thing I knew was that I needed to have a registered company, but I had a registered company that was not trading, a registered company that was not adding value. It took me a long time to kind of get my first client and then squander the money when I get the money and all of those things. So for me, when I understood and so from those mistakes, I took deliberate action in learning entrepreneurship and learning what enterprise building means. And for the last 14 years, I have been a student of entrepreneurship. And as a result, I've gone on to help other people build better businesses and find better ways of becoming entrepreneurs and enterprise built.
I love that. And I love how your journey is so reflective in your work. Yeah. It's so reflective in the way that you steward your enterprises and your entrepreneurs, because I think that is one of the most valuable things an entrepreneur can give to somebody, is not just say, hey, these are the steps to follow, but hey, I'm like you. Yeah. I've walked this journey. These are tangible things that you can put into place. Yeah. These are tangible skills that you can draw from. Yeah. And let's help each other grow and change. I mean, that's what you see in these like old boys networks, right? They groom each other, they work together, they make mistakes, because I think that's also something that people don't talk about enough, that entrepreneurs will fail, right? Like it's okay, but you need to fail fast, fail forward, and get up again. And so I love what you're saying of, okay, for the first 14 years, there was a lot of, the first few years I was like, okay, well, I've got a client. What do I do with this money? How do I get another client? How do I build from that? And so that push and pull of, should I go back to corporate? Should I stay here?
I did. And I think there's no shame in it, right?
100%.
So for me, when you're trying to build and you are also struggling with survival, day-to-day things, nothing moves, because then you get you divert quickly, right? And it's like, I'm just going to do everything because I need to put food on the table. And it moves you away from your objective of enterprise building and building a business for long term. Mm-hmm. So at some point I had to go back, and the going back to corporate for me, and I've done a dance with it, you know. I'm up until I think 2016, 17, when I decided, no, now I'm exiting full time. I needed to do that. One, to also continue to enhance my skills and my expertise in this space, but also to influence what happens on the other side when they decide and they think about how do we support entrepreneurs. So there isn't shame in going back to corporate and going back and finding a job if your enterprise and your business is not working. Some people get stuck in just sitting. I don't want to be looked at as a failure. Failure is part of the deal of being an entrepreneur.
And I think you can only grow from failure, from falling, from trying. And it doesn't mean that if you've had one failure, you need to close your business or it needs to, but it can pivot, it can divert, it can look a little bit different. You can take pause as well, right? You can take pause to rebuild, to heal, to put yourself back together again before you enter out into the world. And so actually off camera, we had a conversation about that, about how entrepreneurship is generally studied around white men, around Western white men. And so this journey looks very linear. It looks very, cutthroat. But that's not necessarily a South African entrepreneur. That's not necessarily an African entrepreneur. Our journeys look a little bit different. And there is no shame in that.
Yeah.
So one question I want to ask you is, because just even listening to you speak now, you speak about enterprises and entrepreneurs as these nuanced entities that each have their own living, breathing ecosystems. What are some of the trends that you're seeing in enterprise building in South Africa currently?
So I think, firstly, a majority of us in Africa go into entrepreneurship and enterprise building out of necessity. Mm-hmm. So it's not, I want to create the next big thing. I want to build the Uber and the industry. And no, a lot of us are drawn into the space out of necessity, whether it's unemployment, whether it's you have to balance work and family, whatever it is. A lot of us go into that space out of necessity. And yes, there's a few that are innovative. There's a few that have identified a market opportunity, which in traditional environments, people would say, identify a market opportunity and then go into it. Tick, 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 tick. But I've seen and I've noted in my 14-year journey that it's not always that case, right? But it's now saying when you've entered out of necessity, it's great to start because you understand and you're driven by that. But it's where I've seen the biggest challenge, and I think we haven't gotten right as particularly in the South African ecosystem, is how do we move from necessity to growth?
Sure.
Right. So what needs to happen when you are thinking about building a business for growth, even though you started out of necessity, and the idea of saying, I want to, move myself from being self-employed in the business and becoming a business owner, that transition is difficult for a lot of people because they think, I need to be hands-on, I need to do all these things. Imagine if all these global companies that are now all over the world, McDonald's is an example. I'm not promoting them, but I'm just making an example. They built a franchise. It was one shop at some point. There are now 1,000 shops. If that person that started this company decided, I have to be the one that does
the cooking, the
cleaning, and
the taxes, all
these things, where would we be from an employment perspective, from an innovation perspective, from a market opportunity perspective? Right. I think a lot of us are struggling with that transition to growth, to say, when I'm thinking about growth, I also need to think about the role that I now need to play in the growth journey of my enterprise. That does not look like me doing the day-to-day things that I initially enjoyed, and it's doing the hard stuff of thinking strategy, thinking about market opportunities outside of your immediate environment and all of those things. And I think we are still struggling to get that right. And I think the support ecosystem is not necessarily gearing us up to do that. It's gearing us to start, but it's when you have started, what now?
That is so good. That is such a good tidbit of information, because you're not an employee of your company, right? Like there needs to be a point where you are this owner, where you are taking charge of that and understanding that delegation is good. Having people in your team is good, because we always say at ECAfrica that I am not a good accountant or somebody who's good with numbers, but I want my business to do really well. So it's in my interest to bring somebody else in who has that skill, who can collaborate with me and also can hold me accountable, right? So how many businesses do we see they get into these pits of just chaos because nobody's holding them accountable, and then everybody's like, it's corruption, it's this. And while that can be so true, there also is just mismanagement and a lack of understanding about this organization that you've created. So what I want to touch on is you have your own business, right? Outside of your book, which you will definitely get into now. But your business focuses on shifting enterprises, on helping entrepreneurs. And so we spoke about ESD and BEE. What is that landscape in South Africa for somebody who's a newbie, for somebody who's like, oh, what is that? Like, if you can give us a brief outline of what you're seeing and the trends that you're currently going through.
So I think, firstly, BEE was instituted as means of redress, right? When you understand the history of South Africa in particular and the exclusion of Black people in formal economies and opportunities to own stuff, you start thinking, okay, what is in democratic era, so we are now 30 years into democracy, the leaders had to think about what are some of the forms of redress that we can introduce to at least level the playing field, right? And BEE was instituted then, I think in 2003, as one of the vehicles to drive economic inclusion in particular. So there are a number of codes within the BEE sector that geared towards facilitating economic inclusion of Black people in the formal mainstream. Enterprise and supplier development is one of those codes. And that code is particularly focused on creating economic opportunities for Black people in business, right? And it's saying, how do we include Black people in the supply and value chain opportunities of South Africa from a public sector perspective and from a corporate South Africa perspective. So enterprise development is then implemented by corporate and government. And what that requires is that companies, large entities and public sector departments have to set aside a budget for enterprise and supplier development. I think it's about 3% of their NPAD, and it obviously differs sector by sector, right? But the general is 3%, and it could be 2% on supplier development. So people that are already supplying the company or government directly, and they have to invest in supporting their development so that either they can grow their spend with them or they can be in a position to go look for other market opportunities outside of that space. Right. And enterprise development is about developing a pipeline of businesses within the value chain that can either come into in your supply chain, or they can be in a position where they can develop businesses that can service a broader market, and you create a budget to support those. So I think in general terms, that's the purpose of that. And obviously the support can be structured in financial support and non-financial support. Financial support is actual investment, and that's why you've seen some corporate companies setting up funds, because then they can channel part of their NPAT into the fund stream and provide either loans, commercial loans, or interest-free loans, or provide grants, or provide VC funding. So it depends on how they've structured it. And then on the non-financial support is business development support, where small businesses can access things like training, mentorship, equipment, and all of those things. So that then forms part of the non-financial support. So that's in the ESD ecosystem. So where we play in is we are a consultancy that specializes in entrepreneurship and SMME development. So we work with the two parties. One, we work with corporates because we sit with them and understand what's your strategic objective. So for us, it's more than just saying what's your budget.
Right. It's not a tick box exercise.
It's not a tick box exercise. So it's not what's your budget and what do you want to do. It's saying what's your strategy and how do you see SMME development in enabling your own strategic objectives as an entity, as a large entity, in growing your own markets, growing your own revenues and all of those things. And then we go look for strategic SMMEs that can come in as partners to help you fulfill. So when people work as partners, it becomes different. And we understand on the other side that entrepreneurs obviously have gaps. They have gaps in resources, gaps in market, gaps in all of those things. And our job is to journey with them and identify those gaps and bring in specialist advice and support to help them bridge those gaps. So we work with them from ideation to to the growth phase of their journeys.
I love that. And I love how it's a very individualistic approach. So I'm sure each SMME that you work with is a little bit different from the one before. Obviously, there's trends. Obviously, there's things that we all need.
Yeah.
But that it's not just everybody go into this ESD program, everybody get trained, and then you jump to another ESD program, another incubator, because I think that's a frustration we're hearing from our ECAfrica network. A lot of the entrepreneurs are saying, but we're not these new entrepreneurs. We're not these new SMMEs. Okay. But everybody tells us to enter through these trainings. But I have a CIPC. I have an accounting system. I have a legal team. I have these things that they're training me on. And so it's nice to hear that there is a different avenue that takes into account the businesses that they're working with and not just channeling funds where they need to go.
I think that comes with experience, right? So I have been in both end of the spectrum. So I've been an entrepreneur that has received support, and I've gone through a program, some programs, and I know the effectiveness and the ineffectiveness of most programs. And I've also been on the other side where I've supported as a ESD specialist, put in money into programs for other service providers to deliver programs, and I've seen the effectiveness and ineffectiveness of these programs. And from that experience, I was able to then say, actually, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And yes, there are common things that you can do that everyone needs, but there is more individualistic support that is required to move businesses from point A to point B. And for me, this is deeply personal. It's not just a ticket box exercise. I feel like I always say with some of my clients that you already know you're going to get your points because you're supporting Black businesses. So let's get that out of the way. But let's do it right. Let's do it intentionally so that it yields growth. For me, growth is important. And growth can't just be measured by how much you've put in. We actually have to measure your investment and say, how has it enabled the businesses that you've invested in to grow, and what does that growth look like for them? And then you can start celebrating and say, I've done this, and how has this impacted your own bottom line? Then we can celebrate and you say, you've done great ESD.
I'm so enjoying this conversation selfishly because it's sort of the way that I think about businesses. So because I come from an academic background, there's a part of me that sees it very theoretically. But then because of the fact that I'm part of a family business, I've been allowed to sit and have these conversations with multiple entrepreneurs. There is a part of me that believes that these organizations are living, breathing organs, that as much as there are humans behind them, there are systems and protocols in these businesses, and to treat them like that, to treat them as if they are living, breathing, that they need to be fed, that they need to be restrained in some places. Because coming back to your first answer, when we was talking about like, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? It does us no good to have millions and millions of survivalist entrepreneurs, of necessity entrepreneurs who only employ themselves or one other person. That actually isn't solving the unemployment crisis. And so I'm really enjoying this conversation about like, how do we talk about these organisms and how can we optimize the way that they behave in the economies that they're in. Not everything's going to be a unicorn, right? Not everything's going to be Uber or Flutterwave or Booking.com, but we can all behave as if we are the next best thing, as if we are a high growth place where people can get value from. Yeah. So that leads me on to, why did you write a book, and why did you want to throw your hat into that ring, right? There is so much literature on entrepreneurship and businesses, and I know that in South Africa sometimes we're seen as this little bubble of like, our entrepreneurs are doing this and our people. I mean, just the other day I was looking at, what is it? Do we have 6 now? 6 billionaires? I was looking at the list and I was like, oh, it feels like there's only one person of color.
Yes.
And it's Patrice Motsepe, so we know him already. Where are the rest? So why did you want to throw your hat into this ring?
So I think for me, because I've taken entrepreneurship as my own school, right? So I have been a student of entrepreneurship all these years, and I felt like at some point you need to write your thesis and say, this is what I've learned over the years. But other than that, for me, because I've studied entrepreneurship and I've studied entrepreneurs across, and I think to the point that you made earlier on, most are white, most are outside of South Africa and all of those things, and they've created models, which I think there's value in them, right?
100%.
But I lacked context in the South African environment. What does that look like? And I think I also lacked a lot of books from people that look like me, and for me, representation matters. And when you start hearing people in your own voice and in your own kind of environment, you start believing that things are possible, right? And I think that was initially that, but then also I said, I want to create a business that can reach people broadly and not just where I'm concentrated,
Right.
and I think a book for me has given me an opportunity to travel the world, and anyone can literally access my book, and whether in South Africa, whether in the US, whatever, because we've built it that way to say it's a way to scale. For me personally, for the business and for myself, is to say, how do we scale and become it and go into people's places and rooms with in the best effective way. And I think the book gave us that, but also I just wanted to capture my own journey, my own experience, and to share some ideas and thoughts of how do we enterprise build, and how do we look at this journey. I mean, the title itself tells it, the entrepreneurial guide to the promised land. And I'm saying there is a promised land that each of us are pursuing when we are building our enterprises. And we have to be very intentional in navigating that journey, but also understand that it took the Israelites 40 years from Egypt to their promised land. So entrepreneurship and enterprise building is that of a long-term building process. And along the way, you're going to experience challenges. Along the way, you're going to experience failures. Along the way, you're going to experience discouragement and all of those things. But there is a promised land that's there at the end. And if you're very clear, and I always say to people, marry the mission and not the products and the services that you're creating, because those will fail depending on the market and what the market wants and the timing and all of those things. But the mission will always remain. If you're very clear what the mission looks like, you are always going to allow yourself to pivot and move along because you are very clear on what the promised land looks like. But I also see entrepreneurs as the Joshuas and the Moses who have been called to lead people to the promised land. So when you're building a business, you are called to lead people to some promised land because you're providing services and products that are enabling people to have better lives, that are enabling people to do better things and to access different, opportunities and all of those. And so when you start thinking about it in that way, you start building differently, and the money is important. And I say it in the book that money is important for you to make money, but it needs to be more than just money when you're building towards a promised land and using entrepreneurship to get to that promised land.
That's so beautiful. And I also, it's very telling, your title, right? Yeah. The Purposeful Entrepreneur, because your passion for it really shines through, but also how deliberate you are on the things that you're talking about, on the way that you're speaking about these businesses, because you're so right. I mean, it's a motivating fact on why we created ECAfrica, and why I did my thesis on the entrepreneurs that I did, because I was surrounded by Black female entrepreneurs and I would hear these really cool stories. And I say cool because I was 16, 17, 18. And I couldn't comprehend why my colleagues and my friends were referencing Elon Musk or even like Stephen Bartlett. I love him, right? But why my colleagues were were drawing inspiration from there when I was surrounded by these women, not only women, but mostly women who were changing the face of business in South Africa, who were shifting their ecosystems, and nobody knew about them. So in our ECAfrica network, with this podcast, but also with what we've done in the past, we want to champion these good stories, because I always say it's really easy to read a book about Fortune 500 person.
Yes.
And think like, wow, they wake up at 5 a.m., they do this, they do that. But it's not very tangible. It's not very realistic. And so when you're reading a book like one of yours, it feels like, oh, but I shop at that place.
Yes.
Or I exist in the same place that she's talking about. I know what that struggle is. I know what it's like to be in load shedding and have a business in South Africa, and the challenges and the pull that takes. And once it feels tangible and real, it's almost like you can
do it too.
Yeah, you can like put on that armor and be like, oh, because she did it, I can do it.
Yeah.
Because she's acknowledging the struggles, I can say that I'm not alone in it. Yeah. Because I do think entrepreneurship can be very isolating and very, you are this island and you are trying to keep everything afloat.
Yeah.
So before we end, I'd like to ask 2 questions. The first is, are there any entrepreneurs, podcasts, anybody that's on your radar? Because we like to learn and champion people on our podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I think the space that I work in has obviously given me the privilege of meeting amazing entrepreneurs and who are doing amazing work. There are 2 ladies in particular that I have been working with for quite some time now, like 3 years now. Mo and Michelle Mkolpani, I hope I got their surname right, but they are founders of the Alice Group, and they provide the Mo's Crib product, so the baskets, so they do... they make baskets out of recycled PVC plumbing material and stuff like that, which is exciting. I mean, they've received great coverage, but I think their story is so inspirational, and what they're doing, creating jobs, number 1, but 2, promoting sustainable living, so sustainability and environmental sustainability. I just think they're amazing. I've worked with entrepreneurs, I think, in Soweto, in Alex, who are doing amazing work. And I think all of us just needs to shine a light on people that have taken the initiative, and it's a sacrifice to say, I'm going to build something for the greater good of other people. Yes, I'm going to make money out of it, but I want to make a positive impact in society. And I think there's just amazing stuff that's happening.
That is so lovely. I'm definitely going to go look them up.
Great.
We've done 4 interviews, I think, now, and everybody's told me a new entrepreneur, and I'm so intrigued by their stories, because, like you're saying, it's important to champion people who are doing good outside of our conversation, outside of me and you. So thank you for that. I'm going to go look them up, and maybe we'll have them on the show one day.
Hopefully.
And then my last question to you is, what is a piece of advice that somebody might have given you as an entrepreneur, or that you regularly give out to entrepreneurs, that has become something that you champion and walk through?
So I think for me, the first thing is that let's not romanticize entrepreneurship. There's real work that goes into enterprise building, and let's not build for Instagram and showing that I can, like, I work anytime, anywhere, and take pictures and position that as entrepreneurship. It's lifestyle. You're building a lifestyle business, whatever it is, but you're not enterprise building. So for me, enterprise building is about thinking about growth. It's about thinking, how can this business add value for long term, not just for now? So I'm not just building for myself, I'm building for my kids, I'm building for their kids. So how do we start using this vehicle for value creation, number 1? How do we start building for growth so that we can create the jobs that are desperately needed in South Africa, so that we can start building the wealth economy that is so much needed within particularly the African community, because we are consumers. Right? How do we start thinking about wealth and wealth building as Africans, and using entrepreneurship and enterprise building as that vehicle to build our own wealth, so that we don't have one Motsepe as the billionaire? We can actually start building a community of Black and African billionaires that are growing in numbers and are creating value. So for me, that, and also just not just looking at our businesses as vehicles for self-employment, but looking them as systems that are geared to create greater value for a bigger market and bigger opportunities for most people in the economy, so that we can grow. And I think for me, think growth, not just self-employment. Think growth, not just making money for yourself, but making money that can last generations, and then adding value. I think that's the most important thing. With whatever you're doing, just make sure that you're adding value and it's making a difference.
Stunning. Thank you so much for that. Okay, guys, I hope that you guys have enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. I hope that you guys have taken out some information. I hope that you guys purchase. You said it's on Takealot and on Amazon?
It's on Takealot and Amazon, and I think we will be in bookstores in the next couple of weeks. So your exclusives and all the other bookstores will be there. But yeah, that is Amazon and Takealot for now.
That is so special. Please like, share, and subscribe. We are ECAfrica on all our networks. And where can they find you?
I am on LinkedIn a lot. So Xoliswa Moraka. I am on Facebook sometimes. Xoliswa Moraka. And I'm also on Instagram. But yeah, and you can find me from my book and reach out.
Stunning.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on our show. Thank you for taking the time to be here. It was so much fun to get to interview you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I enjoyed it.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.